Welcome to the Wiser Than Before podcast, where each episode will get a little wiser. I'm your host, Josh Dodds. On this episode of Wiser Than Before, we're talking about how I checked my new home for EMFs. I'm moving soon, and it's a move that's happening on pretty short notice, as can often be the case. So I didn't have a lot of time to look for the perfect place or location or setup. Well, one thing I wanted to be mindful of as I was looking was any potential EMF exposure. Didn't want to be in a high EMF setting. And I meet more and more people every day. I get people who listen to the show who will reach out to me. I get new clients through the door who will ask about this, and they're interested in EMFs. They believe it can be part of their health picture or something they should at least be aware of. They really genuinely want to do something about it or be smart about it, but they're a little intimidated by the subject. It is a more technical topic, and they don't really know where to start. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, I am by no means the world's foremost expert on EMFs. I've learned about it over time because, as many people with chronic health issues do, you have to learn about a broad range of topics and start to understand which one is affecting you. Also, after I got better and opened up my practice and started helping clients, I've since done trainings, working with colleagues, and training under some really great practitioners. I mean, top-notch people who help some of the toughest cases. And some of these practitioners, they start every patient or client looking at their EMF situation in their home. It's that important. It's that much of a difference maker in cases where people have poor health. So it's definitely a topic worth understanding. So I thought I'd do this episode to share just what I did. It's nothing too technical. It's nothing too complicated, but I'm hoping it'll make approaching EMFs a little bit easier for you. You'll be a little more comfortable with the idea, and you can even try some of these strategies if you want to do them for yourself. So the first thing that I'd look at is not even the home, the house, the apartment, the condo, the building. I look in the area around the home. And the first thing I'd look for is power lines. I'm not talking about your average everyday power lines. There's got to be power sources going to the home, so you're going to have some of that. I'm talking about these big, huge power lines that have like really thick cables, maybe a number of cables on both sides, and the structure's holding them up, but these very tall, wide bases, the kind of thing that really sticks out. I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they had spent their whole life living in Southern California, and they'd often drive out to the desert, out to Joshua Tree National Park or out to Vegas. And they were telling me that recently they noticed as they're doing the drive, there's a section where they go by these power lines, some of the really big ones that I'm talking about that transport a lot of electricity. And there's one part where these lines go over the top of a bunch of Joshua trees. And the Joshua trees under the lines are wilted and different color and drooping and just look generally terrible. I wish I had a picture of it because I think it can really tell the story of what strong exposure to EMFs can do over time. Now, I'm not talking about all EMFs here. I'm talking about really high exposures. Particularly with EMFs, I find the 80-20 rule helps a lot, where you focus on the biggest bang for your buck and don't sweat the smaller pieces. So the big exposure like this, what's happening with these trees, honestly, it's a decent analogy for what happens to us as human beings when we get enough stressors to our health stacked on top of each other. Things like toxins, pathogens, EMFs, stress, pollution, etc. When enough of those get stacked on, our body starts to wilt and droop. And with these trees, it's like, yeah, there's still a tree there. I guess it's still technically alive, but all the vibrancy, the beauty, the color is draining out of it. And a similar type of thing can happen to human beings. For most people, it's obviously not as extreme, but for people who are chronically ill or struggling with health issues for a long time, this can be a piece of it. And this is where I first learned about EMFs. When I was at my sickest, I was searching far and wide for what could be the answer. And in truth, it turns out there's never one answer. There's usually like 10, 15 things stacked up, and you need to make a little progress in several of those areas to start to feel better. So one of the things I came across was EMFs. I ended up hiring a building biologist to come out to my home to do an assessment. And the entire time they were there, I spent it with them. I was asking questions. I was helping them take readings because I wanted to learn the thought process. I wanted to learn what to look for because I knew I was going to need this knowledge in the future. And it really came in handy during this recent housing search. So these really big power lines would be an example under 80/20 of something to look out for. Probably not ideal to have your home be right underneath or right next to something like that. The other thing that I would check in the area before I even got to the home was cell phone towers. An easy way to do that, you just go to Google and type in cell phone towers near me or something like that. And there's a number of sites now where you can go type an address and it will show you all the towers, at least the registered towers in the area. I believe the one I used is called antennasearch.com, but it was pretty useful. It just very quickly popped up the nearest towers and the distance from the address so I could get an idea of what was in the area. You can also do a visual check as you're driving around the area, or if there's a higher vantage point you can get to, a little hill or something like that, and then look and see if anything's sticking out. Now, it's not foolproof because they make cell phone towers to blend in, or they'll build them into signs or parts of the building, but it's one way to look. And again, you're never going to get completely away from cell phone towers. I mean, most people want cell service in their home, so they're going to be around. But at the same token, you don't have to live by the biggest cell phone tower in a 50-mile radius from your city or town. And that's what I was looking for, some of the really big ones. But even a small one, I don't love the idea of living right next to one. So I liked when I could get a mile away or more in some cases. From there, when I got to the actual home, I'd try and scope out where the electric box was for the building, where the electricity entered the building, because that's another source of a lot of power, higher voltage coming into the building. Where I live in Southern California, a lot of times this is on, if the building or home has a garage, the electric box is on the outside of the garage, which is nice because it's not on the other side of the bedroom wall or something like that. If you have that situation where there's the electric box or the electricity enters the home right by a bedroom, then I would definitely have a building biologist come out or an EMF expert. Definitely look into that, because that can be an extremely high exposure that can really make a big difference for your health. When I had the building biologist out to my home, one of the things I asked them, I'm like, how big a difference does this make? Can this really move the needle? And what he told me was, if we find a big exposure, absolutely. He's like, all the time, if we find a big exposure, get the client either rearrange their house or where they spend their time so they're not sitting in that hot spot. Or sometimes people end up moving if they're really having challenges with their health and it's worth it to them. He's like, that can be a game changer. So it's really worth looking at in those high exposure situations. But for the majority of people, they're probably not going to have that level of sensitivity. And that can be tricky too, because like I said, if enough of those things get stacked up, it can start to be a drain on the body. Body can even wilt, like some of those Joshua trees. So it still matters. It might just not be immediately urgent, or you might not be having symptoms from it yet. And then the last thing I check before going into the building is solar power. Where I live in Southern California, solar power is huge. They're really pushing it a lot. There's a lot of incentives. So I knew 80-90% of the homes I looked at are probably going to have solar on them. And that can definitely be a higher EMF exposure. So for me, that was the biggest thing on my radar after I knocked off some of the more obvious ones that I already mentioned. This is the one thing that was a little more, I don't even know if advanced is the right word to call it, but it's something I picked up from the building biologist, because I had purchased this multimeter, which measures voltage. It's a device. You hold a metal rod in one hand and you plug it in to a grounded outlet, and it will give you a voltage reading of what your body is exposed to. And then as you move to different places, not even through the whole house, but just in the room, that voltage, the amount of voltage will change. So it gives you a good idea of where the exposure is. When the building biologist came to my home, did the assessment, we really focused, he had a big focus on where do you spend the most of your time in the home. So we looked at, so I had me sit at my desk and where I work, lay in my bed, in the kitchen where I'm cooking meals, the places where I was most frequently at. That was his big focus, because he's like, these are the most important. If the exposure is managed here, then we've taken care of 80% of your time, maybe more, in the home. So I still had that device from from back when I did the assessment. So the home that I liked the most, that I was ready to move into, I brought that multimeter with me and I took readings in a number of different spots, particularly in the bedroom and another room that I was going to use for a workspace office. And I'm really glad that I did, because the room that I intended to make my bedroom had voltages that were 3 to 4 times higher than the other room. And it had turned out to be right underneath the solar panels. Solar panels on the roof happened to be above that room. So it kind of made sense logically. One thing that a lot of EMF experts or building biologists will talk about, some of them will use this term called sleep sanctuary. And the idea is that it's most important to lower your exposure wherever you're going to sleep. Because when you sleep, that's when your body goes into rest and repair mode. It's when it does a lot of the cleanup. During the day, it's digesting, it's moving, it's producing energy. Your mind's running, which takes up a lot of energy. When you sleep, that mind finally shuts down. All of the movement and energy production during the day isn't needed, and the body can really go into a clean out and repair mode. Now imagine you have a big EMF exposure, so your nervous system is highly wired, your immune system might be stirred up, your body's not going to do a lot of repairing. And so imagine if that goes on for weeks and months, and in some cases years, your body's going to get behind. It's just natural process of cleaning up and rebuilding. Nothing else bad even needs to happen. It's just like putting the stop or drastically slowing down this natural process of repair. And that is going to add up over time. So talk about this idea of the sleep sanctuary, which is minimize your exposure as much as possible, especially for sleep. So it'd be like putting a bed in a room with lower exposure, etc. So that's why I took the measurements. I took measurements in a number of different places in each of those rooms, found the lowest one, and I ended up flipping my bedroom into the low exposure room. And I even put my bed in the spot in that room with the lowest exposure, because there were still some readings that were higher than I would like. So I was really glad that I did that. Now, that was the only semi-technical thing I did. I don't think you can even really call it technical. Anybody could learn how to do this. It's just a foreign concept. It's not something most people have been introduced to. So that's why it seems a little technical, but it's, if you can use a cell phone, you could certainly use this device. And it definitely helped me a lot to get some data points. Another thing I could have done that would have been more technical, or at least given me more data, was to buy a device that would measure radio frequencies, things like Wi-Fi. I'd say the closer you are to your neighbors, the more important that would be, because you could be affected by whatever Wi-Fi devices they have going on. Whereas the farther away you are, you can control your own Wi-Fi device. At night, you can shut it down and have less exposure. I opted not to do that. I didn't have the equipment, didn't decide to purchase it. Again, 80-20. Those were the 5 things I did. They were pretty quick and easy. They really didn't add any time to my housing search, but definitely gave me some more comfort that I was at least doing my best to limit some EMF exposure and not add more stressors onto my body. So I hope this episode helped you feel slightly more comfortable with EMFs, and maybe even give you some ideas of ways you can check out EMFs in and around your home. If you want a plain English explanation of how EMFs work and affect our bodies, recommend checking out the episode I did with my brother, Jake Dodds. It's the second episode ever on this show. And in there, he did a really nice job of breaking down in layman's terms, here's what EMFs are, here's how they affect your body, and why you might want to care about them. And in the future, I hope to have more EMF experts who can lay this out at an even deeper level. If you follow anyone or know anyone who's great at communicating these ideas, please email me, let me know, and I'll reach out to get them on the show. In the meantime, I'll see you in a couple days for the next episode. Stay wise. Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you feel you're walking away a little wiser. If that's the case, consider sharing the link to this episode with someone you care about or someone it could help. It's free for you, and you just might make someone's day. A little drop of wisdom is something we could all use from time to time. So press on the share button and send it to whoever comes to mind. This young podcast has sprouted out of nothing. No following, no connections. It's simply grown by word of mouth because people like you have shared it with other people. Thank you so much for doing that. We look forward to building this community and bringing you more great content so we can all walk away a little wiser. See you in a couple days for our next episode. Stay wise.